Triangle strategy is a rather poor name for a video game, but like the old adage says, you can't judge a book by its cover, or I guess in this case a video game by its title. Hey everybody, it's Yggdrasil, and I wanted to make a first impressions video about Triangle Strategy, a game published by Square Enix and Nintendo for the Nintendo Switch that came out not too long ago. I only got my copy a few days back and wasn't really able to sit down and have time to play it until the weekend, but I've so far had a rather enjoyable time playing the game and seeing what it has to offer. To that end, I wanted to make a first impressions video since I'm only a few chapters in and have a couple of key points I want to bring up so far. If you want to discuss anything that I plan to talk about in this video, please let me know in the comment section down below, and consider following me on Twitter where I can far more easily interact with people, since YouTube doesn't really allow small channels like mine to post quick updates. With that said, let's get right in. So first off, I want to point out that I'm only in chapter 3 of the game, and you may say, well, that's not even 10 hours in, how can you make a first impressions video off of so little? And I want to say that's not really true at all. There's quite a lot of promise that the game presents right off the bat. Now, I actually didn't even play the demo for this game due to time constraints on my part, so when I finally was able to sit down, I fully expected this game to act similarly to Octopath Traveler, its quote-unquote spiritual predecessor. And boy was I wrong. Triangle Strategy, if anything, imprints upon me more of a modern take of the older games of the Fire Emblem series, with some newer functions for quality of life and a splash of Dungeons and Dragons thrown in. Let's begin with some world building info to set the scene. So the story is situated around the lords and nobles of 3 adjacent countries on the continent of Norzelia, each bearing a special unique resource vital for a nation to have stability. Encompassing the western region is the Kingdom of Glenbrook, where our main protagonist Serenoa resides. Glenbrook houses abundant natural commodities owing to its hospitable grasslands and forestry, and wine and lumber are notable resources. As such, Glenbrook boasts the largest population of the 3 nations. Inhabiting the more frigid tundra to the northeast is the Grand Duchy of Esfrost, known for rich deposits of ore, namely iron. The people of the kingdom, hardened by their harsh environment, are ruled by the Archduke and their appointees. Lastly, encompassing the southwest of Norzelia is Hyzant, a desert oasis kingdom presided over by a Hierophant, a speaker who relays message on behalf of their religion's goddess of salt. Salt, you guessed it, is in fact their most precious commodity, and is not found anywhere else in Norzelia. Due to salt being a necessity for daily life, Hyzant thrives off of exporting salt and is arguably the wealthiest of the nations. Their affairs are moderated by 7 ministers, each appointed to govern over various aspects of their way of life. Now then, with these 3 nations each having resources that the other requires to function, the countries lived side by side until tensions grew and surmounted into full-flung war engulfing the whole continent. Known as the Salt Iron War, several battles were waged until King Regna of Glenbrook and the various lords and war heroes under him put the war to a decisive end. Using the stage he had won to his advantage, all 3 nations agreed to found the Norzelia Consortium, a 4th faction comprised of members of all 3 nations that would mediate fair and unbiased trading throughout the continent. 30 years have passed since, and unfortunately the consortium's position, however, has stagnated. In fact, the consortium failed to fix numerous trading flaws for iron, which have resulted in many deaths for Esfrost, while Hyzant still seemingly holds a much larger sway over salt than either Glenbrook or Esfrost would like. To that end, still King Regna enacted an accord that he made with the former Archduke at the end of the war, calling for a marriage to be held between Lord Serenoa, son of Lord Simon of House Wolfort, and Lady Frederica, the Archduke's half-sister and a Rosellan woman, as distinguished by her rosy pink hair. In addition to the wedding, ties between these 2 nations would be further strengthened by the founding of a new mining facility situated in northern Glenbrook. Hyzant, seeing the newfound surge in resources that its neighbors would gain access to from this new mine, was then strong-armed into the accord and mining venture. The mine would then be overseen by delegates from each kingdom. In this way, the 3 nations each would have access to new resources, they would have new reasons to pursue open discussion with one another, and all 3 could re-evaluate and correct the failings of the Norzelian Consortium. Prior to the mine's official opening, then, a grand tournament and banquet is set to be held at Whiteholm, the capital city of Glenbrook, and that is finally where the main story begins. Now, at this point, I was content to fall into the trap of thinking that this game would be some sort of rock, paper, scissors level of writing, or that, oh, the main male protagonist is from Glenbrook, and the main female protagonist is from Esfrost, ergo Hyzant is big bad, get on with it, but no. The game delicately works to show you that no single faction is inherently good or bad, and that there are both good and bad eggs on all sides. I'll get into that shortly. I want to talk about the characters themselves for a moment. Again, bringing up my earlier thoughts that this game took a lot from Octopath Traveler, I was worried that the characters would be similarly fleshed out. And they certainly are tropey, but one of the things I've learned from playing Octopath Traveler that I'm using to play this game is that I am treating this game like a theater performance. What I mean by this is that as a viewer, I can't really see the characters portrayed on the stage well. Their details are just far too small for someone in the audience to note all too well. Pretty much indicative of the character sprites and how we can't view their details. How Theatrics goes over this problem with detail then, as well as addressing sometimes corny dialogue, is rather simple. They just embrace it, they go over the top, they exaggerate as much as they can, they make it a show. And this has honestly let me play the game with so much more enthusiasm than I originally anticipated. A great example of this is when at a small hosting party before the big banquet is held, Frederica's cousin, Lord Dragan, an inventor who recently discovered how to create dynamite and is one of the 3 chosen delegates for the new mining facility, he partakes in a bit too much wine, and to my utter delight, the voice actor used the situation and had fun with it. He went all in on the drunken monologuing, and then he fell over on his ass, and it was just a nice fluid animation and gesture.
Dragan, are you quite all right?
Worry not, Frederica. I'm just a bit tipsy. Perhaps I should just lie.
It would seem Lord Dragan has turned in for the night.
Another example of Theatrics at work in this game includes the character profile cards, which you can view anytime a character is talking during the story. The character cards give brief descriptions of their character's background, but again, in the spirit of Theatrics, many characters are given detailed artwork that gives them pronounced and exaggerated expressions that befit their personality. Lord Thalos and Lady Erica of Esfrost are upper-crust nobles with sneering expressions, aligning with their demeanor towards people that they believe to be beneath their station. Sorsley End, Hyzant's Minister of Salt, probably the wealthiest man alive given his position, has the stereotypical face and body of someone that just screams, "I have more wealth and riches than you'll ever see in your lifetime." It's theatrical vehicles like these that are going to help the game throughout its playtime by keeping everything fresh and enthusiastically spirited. Now, as earlier stated, I was beginning to worry that the game would be a 3-way trope fest where one country is going to be the big bad and the countries our protagonists came from are morally better, maybe with a classic JRPG flip halfway into the game. And while that certainly could be something that may happen, I haven't gone there yet, that's not really what the game ends up portraying, at least initially, especially after seeing that opening exposition. In fact, the game goes to extreme lengths to flesh out the world far more than I ever would have thought, especially this early in. First, a lot of the dialogue and exposition is completely optional. Aside from main quests presented as red on the main map, there are these green side quests that so far have been completely non-combat related. In fact, the very first one the game throws at the player takes place away from the main character's group entirely and is used to introduce many of the prominent characters that are going to attend the banquet. Additionally, there are moments throughout each chapter that also are optional, but reward you with tidbits, exposition, items, and even alterations to future dialogue options should you choose to explore around for a while. I really love then that this game allows for 2 playstyles. One for people who want to speed through the game, they don't care about the story, they're just engrossed with combat and need the bare minimum amount of exposition to move on. Or for people who really truly care about the exposition and the world building and they want to see where everything's going to lead into. It gives the players a lot more options on how to approach the game, and that's always a thumbs up in my book. Speaking of giving the players options, one of the main selling points of the game is that your actions and choices while playing as Serenoa will influence how some events later in the game will shape. At only 3 chapters in, I've already actually seen a major choice of the path I want to give my character, but extends much just beyond a handful of major choices. Often throughout the chapters, you as a player will be given a series of options to choose from in how you want to respond to a question or situation. They so far have been 3 choices available each time, and again, this is where I fear things would become a trope fest of each response either being black, white, or neutral gray. But again, I was pleasantly surprised. Many of the questions in fact address the situation presented in similar ways, but instead present Serenoa himself as a character a little bit differently. Many of these responses in fact display Serenoa is keenly aware of what's happening around him, but it is the way that you'll have Serenoa talk that will influence the way the characters around him will respond and act towards him. This will also play into the story much later, as I understand player choices will influence what characters could potentially join you along the way. If these choices indeed lead to drastic differences, this could allow for quite a lot of longevity to the game, including maybe multiple playthroughs or perhaps finding details you'd otherwise not see if you didn't pick the route that you chose. Again, I really have to praise the game for allowing the player to approach it how they want to. The last topic I want to bring up in this video is the one thing I haven't brought up yet. Of course, I'm talking about combat and character customization. You'll remember that I mentioned triangle strategy gives the feeling of an earlier Fire Emblem game with some quality of life changes, and that extends and is perhaps best seen in the way that combat is presented. It also has some really nice Dungeons & Dragons inspired features. The map and tile plotting are mostly the same, but player and enemy turns are actually intermingled, seemingly based off of their speed stat. Characters have the usual stats, and the terrain type and height can affect movement. There are some nice features that I also want to discuss. The first one that I noticed is that items are not personal, but shared between and accessible to all units whenever it's their turn. This allows for so much more freedom since characters are not mandated to carry out their own healing items or passive bonuses for holding trinkets or other items. In fact, each character can carry up to 2 equipable trinkets, things like HP up or attack up +2, something like that. It's a nice touch that helps to shape up your character's stat line without forcing them to hold item slots that they would otherwise use to carry antidotes and whatnot. Second is the use of currency. There's of course the standard gold that's used in every RPG ever made, but there's a second and very interesting currency called kudos coins. These coins are rewarded every time the player fulfills certain objectives in combat. Getting a backstab, having a character on the opposite side of an enemy follow up, striking multiple foes at once, there's quite a lot of ways to be rewarded with these coins. Now kudos coins can then be used at a special shop to obtain quietus points and unique special abilities that are usable by any character in your roster. They can also be spent on other items like even more lore books, but ultimately they are just another way to allow your character to shine. Third, in addition to your characters leveling up, you can also upgrade your weapons. Thankfully there's no durability on them, thank God. And this will allow you to further enhance your combat capability. You can target specific upgrades at the cost of gold and some material, but you as the player can personally choose what kind of upgrade you want. You can even acquire new skills this way and change out some of these passive buffs for others once you unlock them. Materials then are bought with either gold or picked up as spoils on the battlefield. Basic spoils can be picked up either by you or the enemy simply by ending a character's turn on the spot on that map. Exquisite spoils are always rewarded upon beating up a unique enemy that held them. You can also obtain additional materials by participating in mental mock battles available at the encampment. They are repeatable, low risk, and offer the player the chance to consistently and repeatedly earn coins, gold, character experience, and materials outside of the main story chapters. This is a wonderful feature that we've seen in newer Fire Emblem games, and I'm more than glad to see it incorporated here. If you feel like a chapter is a little too rough on you at your selected difficulty, you can stop by the encampment for some mock battles and feed your desired character some additional XP. Then you can use the materials you got to give them any potential weapon upgrades or even a fancy new equipable trinket to round them out. Then you can go back to the main chapter without any repercussions. It's simple, elegant, and it makes the player feel that they can approach combat with whatever preparedness that they so desire. And that is finally where I'm going to stop for now. Perhaps I'll make a follow-up video as time goes by and I get the opportunity to play the game more, but this has been my first impressions with Triangle Strategy. It's a very promising start indeed. But please, tell me what do you think? Do you have your own thoughts on anything I brought up, or is there something you feel differently about? Let me know in the comments below. You can also reach out to me on my Twitter, where I'm far more active on a daily basis. If you enjoyed this video, please consider giving it a like and subscribing to my channel, where I plan to keep talking about and playing many different video games, particularly those I resonate with and love deeply. Again, thank you very much for your time, and as always, have a great day.